January 15th, 1919, a crisp winter day in Boston's North End. The temperature was unusually warm for January, climbing above freezing for the first time in weeks. None of the residents could have imagined that this seemingly ordinary Wednesday would become one of the strangest disasters in American history. Let's begin with the tank itself, a marvel of industrial engineering, or so it seemed. Arthur Gell, the treasurer of United States Industrial Alcohol, had ordered its construction in 1915 without consulting a single architect or engineer. The tank was built by workers who weren't even qualified to read a blueprint. Steel plates, supposedly tested for integrity, were merely slapped together and painted brown to match the color of their contents. The tank's construction was rushed to meet the growing demand for industrial alcohol during World War I. But from day one, it was a disaster waiting to happen. The steel plates were too thin. The rivet spacing was irregular. No proper stress tests were ever conducted. Local children would collect leaked molasses in tin cans, turning industrial negligence into a playground game. On Commercial Street stood this massive steel tank, 50 feet tall and 90 feet in diameter. Owned by the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, it held 2.5 million gallons of molasses, waiting to be converted into industrial alcohol for munitions manufacturing. The tank was a looming presence in the neighborhood, but locals had grown accustomed to its ominous creaking and groaning. Isaac Ehrlich, who operated a coal yard nearby, had repeatedly complained about the leaks. That tank, he would say, is going to burst someday. Children playing in the area would scrape hardened molasses from the tank's base for a sweet treat. The company's response? Send a man with a paintbrush to cover the brown stains that appeared on the tank's exterior. At approximately 12:30 p.m., as workers ate their lunches and children played in the streets, the impossible happened. The tank's metal walls suddenly gave way with a tremendous roar. Witnesses described it as sounding like a machine gun, followed by the screech of twisting metal. Then came the flood. Picture, if you will, a wave of molasses 15 feet high, moving at 35 miles per hour through the streets of Boston. The physics of the disaster were extraordinary. The molasses acted as a non-Newtonian fluid, becoming more viscous as it cooled and trapping everything in its path. In the first few seconds, the surge crushed buildings like they were made of matchsticks. The nearby elevated railway station groaned under the impact. Steel support beams bent like rubber. The personal stories of that day are heart-wrenching. 10-year-old Maria DeStasio was at home when the wave hit. Her house collapsed around her, and she was found hours later, crushed beneath the debris. George Leahy, a city worker, was having lunch in a city storage building when the wave struck. He drowned in the molasses, trapped in the basement as the thick liquid filled his lungs. Anthony DeStasio, Maria's brother, was walking home from school when he saw the wave approaching. He was picked up and carried several blocks by the flood, finally coming to rest near North End Park. When rescuers found him, he was so thoroughly coated in molasses that they initially thought he was a brown leather doll. The scope of destruction was almost beyond comprehension. Buildings were swept off their foundations. Horse-drawn carts were thrown into the harbor. The molasses wave picked up a truck and hurled it into Boston Harbor. People caught in its path had no chance to escape. The thick, sticky substance made swimming impossible. Stephen Puleo, author of Dark Tide, describes it best. Molasses, waist-deep, covered the street and swirled and bubbled about the wreckage. Here and there struggled a form, whether it was animal or human being, was impossible to tell. The air temperature that day made the molasses thicker as time passed, trapping victims like insects in amber. The rescue effort was hampered by the nature of the disaster itself. Firefighters and police officers found themselves stuck in the molasses as they tried to reach victims. The Boston Post reported that the sight that greeted the first of the rescuers on the scene was enough to make the most hardened veteran of the department shudder. The numbers tell a grim story. 21 people lost their lives. 150 were injured. Horses, essential for transportation and commerce, were caught and drowned in the flood. The cleanup would take weeks, with hundreds of people working to remove the sticky substance from the streets, buildings, and even their own clothes and skin. The technical investigation that followed was groundbreaking for its time. Engineers discovered that the tank's steel had been only half as thick as it should have been. The rivets that held the steel plates together showed signs of structural weakness and had been improperly spaced. The steel itself was found to have been deficient in manganese, making it more brittle and susceptible to fracture. But this wasn't just a freak accident. It was a disaster born of negligence. The tank had shown signs of stress from the day it was built. Locals reported molasses dripping from its seams, which workers would paint brown to hide the leaks. The company had ignored these warning signs, prioritizing profit over safety. The legal proceedings that followed were unprecedented in their scope and complexity. Hugh Ogden, the auditor appointed by the Massachusetts Superior Court, spent 6 years hearing testimony from expert witnesses, survivors, and company officials. The proceedings generated more than 25,000 pages of transcript and established many of the basic principles of modern corporate liability law. The aftermath would change American industry forever. The disaster led to stricter requirements for architectural plans and engineering oversight. For the first time, construction projects required sign-off from a licensed architect and engineer. The era of unchecked industrial expansion was ending. Massachusetts began requiring that construction plans be signed off by licensed architects and engineers, a practice that soon spread nationwide. The legal battle was a landmark case in the history of corporate liability. Over 100 lawsuits were filed against the United States Industrial Alcohol Company. The hearings lasted for 6 years and involved more than 3,000 witnesses. Finally, the company was found responsible for the disaster, leading to settlements worth about $7 million in today's money. The victims' stories continued to emerge long after the disaster. Survivors reported psychological trauma that lasted for years. Many developed a fear of sticky substances. Some reported nightmares of drowning in molasses well into their old age. The community's collective trauma took generations to heal. Even today, residents of Boston's North End claim that on hot summer days, you can still smell molasses in the air. While this might be urban legend, the impact of the disaster remains very real. The site where the tank once stood is now a recreational complex, with a small plaque commemorating the tragedy. The bocce courts that now occupy the space give no hint of the terror that once unfolded there. The Great Molasses Flood serves as a stark reminder of the cost of corporate negligence and the importance of industrial regulations. It's a uniquely American disaster that sounds almost too bizarre to be true, yet its lessons remain relevant today. In an age of increasing industrial complexity, the story reminds us that cutting corners on safety can have catastrophic consequences. As we look back on this catastrophe, we're reminded that safety regulations are written in blood. Every law, every inspection requirement, every building code exists because someone somewhere paid the ultimate price for their absence. The Great Molasses Flood stands as a testament to the importance of engineering oversight, corporate responsibility, and the value of human life over profit. The streets of Boston's North End have long since been cleaned, but the memory of January 15, 1919, lives on. It's a testament to human resilience, a cautionary tale about industrial safety, and a reminder that sometimes truth is indeed stranger than fiction. As one survivor put it was like Judgment Day in the North End, but instead of fire and brimstone, God rained down molasses.